Hello, family and friends from the global stage. I welcome my dear colleague, Dr. Pillay, this evening, and we're going to be engaging ourselves in a topic which is contemporary. And just to reflect on Sunday, we were invited to a function organized by a group of people called themselves it is known as Miyahara, which means light, and it's about a topic that very contemporary. It was about cancer awareness. I think the curveball at the end of the day of the breakfast session in the panel discussion was about lifestyle as a forefront of cancer awareness and cancer prevention. So we're going to delve into that tonight to say that why is this contemporary topic at the moment, and why is this so-called apprehension, and why there's a amount of fear? Is there understanding, or there is a misunderstanding about what cancer is really about? Danny, on Sunday we had this intensive extrapolation of facts and information, cross dialogues, engagement of a wide range of peoples of different backgrounds. And what is your impression in terms of your feeling from Sunday coming to tonight about cancer and cancer awareness?
Well, I think the most critical thing, Reggie, is that we got to understand that it's not something out of our control. That potentially 85% of cancer is directly correlated to our lifestyle. When you look, there's about 50 odd types of cancers that are hereditary, and that is actually only 0.3% of the world population, which then in turn only contributes to 3 to 10% of all cancer. So when people talk, oh, I've inherited this, or I've got no control over this, it's in my genetics, you realize that's true for about only 3 to 10% of cancer. The rest, we have a large input in what we do for that outcome. So that to me is the most important thing to understand, that we have a level of control in the outcomes of this. And what's glaring is that about 1/3 of cancers in the Western world is directly related to smoking.
Wow.
And another 30 to 35% with alcohol, obesity, and lifestyle. That's the hierarchy. So that's 65% of cancers already there. And then you add other parts of infection and inflammations of 20% and the inherited to 3 to 10%, you start getting an overview of where this is. That's looking purely from a biological point of view and biostatistics. Of course, there are other factors, mental states, stress factors, all of this that contribute. But looking at direct causes, tangible causes, it's scary for me to understand why we still allow smoking, for example. Interesting to see, like in New Zealand, where they're putting a cutoff date, saying at a certain period of time, I think it was 2019 or 2022, that from that age group onwards, the smoking won't be allowed. So if you're under a certain age group, you won't be accessing cigarettes, so you phase it out over time. So that for me, that's already there and then a scary but real statistic. And it's topical insofar as that cancer, as you see around us, it's becoming pandemic levels. In Gauteng, you're looking at a 1 in 6 to 1 in 5 risk of developing it. So it's on our doorstep. I don't think anyone around doesn't know somebody in their family or friend structure that has not been, exposed or subjected to some level of cancer or cancer scare or cancer treatment. So it's in a way, it sounds a bit morbid, but more uplifting is the fact that we have control over this. We're not something that's happening to us, You can't control if a meteorite hits the planet. That's out of your control. But you certainly have a control over these kind of things. And lifestyle is such an important aspect of this as a preventative method, not only when we're infected or affected, that we start then reacting to it. I think that's the take-home message.
So Danny, so listening to you now, so you're alluding to the fact that epigenetic factors are greater than the genetic factors in cancer disposition. Is this correct?
That is correct. Epigenetics is the expression of genetics, and it is directly related to how we feed it. So, I use the example of having a chain in the boot of your car. and that chain has a weak link in it. But you've never towed a car before, so you don't know about the weak link. The day you decide to tow a car, then you realize, oh, I have a weak link because under stress it pops. It's the same with our life. So if you've got a weakness in the genetic structure, and if you follow a righteous living style, you're unlikely to stress it. But add the stresses of life, whether it's mental stresses, physical stresses, dietary stresses, you're going to trigger this. So yes, epigenetics is a bigger part than genetics in all disease.
In context, you highlighted very important today that smoking and alcohol are two primary lifestyle causes of cancer. So in this current age of the 21st century, with all the knowledge that we've got on multimedia and Google and so forth, and there is a great deal of knowledge and expression to say, these are factors that affect your health. What is the reason you think that people are not cognizant and not taking this to heart?
I think it's a very simple answer. And that answer is accountability. And a lack of accountability is pervasive. Not only for the individual, we see it in political system, we see it in all kinds of systems, medical systems, accounting systems. If we look at the level of, or the lack of accountability, in governance all around the world. So it's not just at the individual level, it is at the societal level, it is at the administrative level. We've lost accountability. And remember, we're accountable to 90 trillion cells in our body. The decisions you make to put food into your mouth, you're the administrator into this body, and we're lacking that accountability. It's as simple as that. Because what we have, this idea that it's going to be somebody else's problem until it's ours.
I'd just like to highlight an analogy, right? So we have this educated population, right, and who have this intellect, and they have the power to discriminate. For example, if they know that they have, for example, 5 million rands in the account, and they will get an investment banker, investment broker, how to manage the finances and these things. Yet on their own body, the closest to them, they will not go to the attention in detail of investing in an investment banker. I'm using an analogy to invest in a practitioner who will holistically integrate them and guide them to manage themselves. So there's great disparity in two poles of lifestyle, but both are close to them.
So I think that's got to do with how we've done what we call education models, and what we've called teaching and learning and education systems. So what we've done is we've cultivated intellect, but we've destroyed all forms of intelligence. So intellect, basically teaching people how to think and reason to certain levels, but losing all the common sense principles of biological systems. So I use the example like I used on the weekend, and you give a cow dry hay and it'll eat it. You give it dry sawdust, it's not going to eat it. Your cow doesn't have a degree, but it has the natural intelligence of its biological system to know that it can't eat sawdust. But a human has zero clue on what is good or bad for them. You put anything in front of their face, they will eat it. That is the reality. We have lost our ability, our innate intelligence about good and bad. So we've lost our sensibility and our sensitivity in order to make discrimination. So even given the fact that we will tell people this is bad for you because it's shown by the data, for example, smoking's bad, or eating processed food, we know that processed meat is bad for bodies. It's a great contributor to cancers because of the nitrate content. That's published data. It's not something that we still pondering whether it has an influence or not. Yet it's sold. You won't find governments ruling against it. But you'll find that, for example, in a pandemic, where governments will make the decision to save our lives from a pandemic, but we have no influence by governments to stop heart disease, for example, cancers, when we can change a lot of this by addressing what's available and what kinds of foods. When we've got a lot of bad oils and bad fats and bad foods that are being sold constantly in the world market. But there's no leadership around that because it makes money.
It's very interesting what you're saying about the poor choices. And from a dental perspective, oral health perspective, I've seen that especially the pandemic and post-pandemic, the multiple factorial presentation of mouth infections and diseases that come from gum infections, come from temporomandibular joint infections, or stress levels, and affected by their own choice, right? Though these are smart people, they're accountants, engineers, they're able to work from home, but didn't take prudent decisions to maintain health, right? So going down the line, how can we get these sort of people invoked to understand that they have a responsibility not to anybody else, to themselves?
Well, I think, talks like this, there's a lot of data out there. They are none so blind as those who don't want to see. So I think, when we use the word educated, we mean that they've acquired some external qualification to do a profession. But what they're not educated is in understanding their own bodies and beings. Because that's what we have to master. Understanding what our bodies need, what is required, whether it's fresh air, exercise, good food, sleep. We need to understand this because our modern word, when we use the word wealth, the etymology of wealth comes from the word well and health. That's where we got the word wealth. But today we use it synonymously with monetary gain. So we're seeking this monetary wealth while losing physical wealth. So in the old days would say, you had a wealth of knowledge. So we need to understand that. We need to getting back to our inner wisdom. Understanding that, as I say, you are responsible for 90 trillion cells. That's a big job. This is your little economy. This is the party that you are. This is what the cells voted for. You're thinking and feeling. You're responsible for this. When we can take individual accountability, then there's more likely that we're going to take group accountability. And so this idea of educated really means acquiring some skill outside of you. It's not about inner wisdom. So this inner identity, this inner value is another form of education, of self-education, self-love. And then if you understand how the body works, you're not going to do the wrong thing. Because if you understand how a car radiator works, it needs water cooling. You won't put oil in it, would you?
Never.
Why? Because you know it's going to damage it. So if you have that same fundamental understanding that if I'm putting all these damaging processed foods in me and these chemicals into me, that's going to cause damage in my body, would you do it?
So Danny, how does a thing like alternative to cigarette smoking, known as contemporary in the world of South Africa, especially the vaping industry is booming everywhere. You see all the shops, and then there's chemicals in it, there's flavoring, there's coloring agents in it, and it naturally is that I'm sure that those are not good for your body.
Well, we know that there's something called e-vali, e-cigarette and vaping associated lung injury. So the formaldehyde content in vaping is high, the nicotine content will be high. You need to have, I think it's 3 times or 4 times the puffing rate of a cigarette to get the same nicotine in. But because you're using a heating mechanism that's so high that goes to a few hundred degrees, you start causing damage locally, but it can cause cerebral, cardiovascular damage. The jury is not out. But the very safe thing to understand, whatever man has supposedly invented, a few decades shows us it's damaging. And I can show you tons of those things that we've done. Whether we've created plastic that now we find takes 300 years to dissolve, it's a harmful thing. Whatever we decide that is useful for humans becomes disastrous in a short while. 3-4 decades ago, eat margarine because it's better than butter. That was the catch thing. And now we know it can't be better than butter because it's not naturally occurring, it's more harmful. Yet we've spent decades telling us how good it was. We say eat low fat. Full cream is 3%, low fat is 2%. And I say, well, until I see a cow that produces low fat milk, you should stick to what cows produce, for example. Not that I'm encouraging you should be drinking copious amounts of dairy in any event. But this is the idea that man proposes things that turn out to be disastrous to our biology. So I won't be surprised, give it a few decades, and we'll be told how dangerous e-cigarettes and vaping are. And of course, a lot of people are switching over. For the non-smoker, it's better than having someone bellowing out their smoke all over. But it's still toxic. It's all, as you say, sweetness, colorants, they're all going to cause problems.
So talking about sweetness and colorants, right? And we know people use alternatives to sugar, whether it's in the form of aspartame and the other things like saccharin. So what is the correlation that in affecting your cell structure and cell regeneration?
Well, firstly, we can start by when you put an artificial sweetener in your mouth, your biology wasn't designed to understand artificial and real. So it will taste sweet, and some of these artificial sweeteners are very sweet as the manufacturers claim. So your tongue detects sweetness, your brain gets triggered, and then your pancreas starts making insulin. Except you do not get the concomitant effect of an increased blood sugar because there's no real sugar in it. Then what actually happens is your body says, oh, there's no sugar and I've produced all this insulin, so I'll become resistant to the insulin. So we've created insulin resistance that accounts to about a third of the world population today.
Wow.
So again, man fiddling. And we're told to have these, and around the world, you're finding authorities now taxing sugar. Not having for refined sugar, but we're taxing sugars. We're using more artificial sugars in drinks and colas and carbonated drinks. And I'll say, wait till we'll figure this out. And last year, I think the WHO has already made some pronouncement on artificial sugars. And so we'll find out that they are highly toxic in the high doses. Okay, and so if most of our drinks, then we've got the non-aspartame and acesulfame came. So I'm not a fan of using any artificial thing, erythritol, sorbitols, or any of those kind of sucralose. You should get to the idea of not getting your tongue dependent on artificial sweetness.
So Danny, let's listen to it in summary. There's a correlation between lifestyle and cancer, right? How do we sort of mend our way that to create this awareness to say that cancer and cancer awareness and prevention is related distinctively to your lifestyle?
So, I mean, cancer is multifactorial. We've said there is a small portion that is genetic. It's not only what you eat, it's the aerial pollutants, it's the tobacco, it's the alcohol, it's the radiation, all those things. What you're doing is taking a lifestyle option that minimizes and mitigates getting it. There's no guarantee you can't get it. Okay, there'll be other factors. So you could be eating well and living right near a heavy, let's say, cell mass that produces a lot of radiation. So that can increases. But you're taking a course of action that minimizes, mitigates risk. So we have to take the best route, saying we're living in a toxic environment. So what diet will say that facilitates detoxing? Would we go and do certain detoxing processes every quarter? So it's this kind of proactive steps that we have to take, because you're living in a far more polluted world compared to 100 years ago, 50 years ago, or even 10 years ago. So it's taking all these extra steps and saying our bodies need even more protection, even more support than it ever needed. So it makes sense to eat a much healthier diet. Exercise better, sleep better, do yoga, do mindfulness, work on our emotional life, work on our mental life. So it's not merely I'll just eat healthy foods. It's also dealing with how you do with stress. Am I holding on to anger and resentment? Am I holding on to past pains? All these things so that we are more fluid as human beings and going through our lives as comfortable and as relaxed and as present as possible.
Thanks, Daddy. Just before I end, it's just a matter of getting ourselves tuned to some relevant topics. And you mentioned about diet and effects. And there's something very contemporary in the world today is about gut-brain health and about the microbiomes and how that creates a balance. So I just want you to look at that and reflect on that in terms of just to give us a precursor for our next set of videos that we will produce together to discuss these very relevant topics I mentioned.
So the gut-brain health, or the link between them is actually from the time of the embryo. If you remember, we have a forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain on the neural tube. On the other side, we have the foregut, hindgut, midgut, and the hindgut. They almost form from the same neural tube. So we know the gut produces a lot of serotonin, more than the brain does. So when you have this gut feel that we talk about, it's real. That we know that the gut is the start of your first immune response. So when you're having the first mother's milk, which is actually full of colostrum and all the immunoglobulins, and then your gut is lined with the pious patches, those are all part of that immune development. Then the friendly bacteria. We have about 10 times more bacterial cells than human cells in the body. There's about 500 species of bacteria within the gut. They are all there working together in harmony with us. So that gut health is so important, because the gut differentiates what goes into the body or not. So you might swallow something and the gut has to make the decision of absorption or excretion. And so you've got this good friendly bacteria. There's toxins that you help excrete. If you absorb certain toxins, it affects mental health. Butyric acid, for example, can cause colon disease. So we've got this entire spectrum of things happening in this. And what we call the microbiome is that's healthy flora that should be in the gut. That's your first line of protection. When that gut flora starts going, you're going to start getting infiltration of the colon lining. So you're going to get these things like leaky gut that we quite hear of. And all these kind of things where we create food sensitivities and all kinds of health problems. So microbiome, gut health, fundamental, cornerstone of health.
Thank you, Danny, for the engagement this evening. And we look forward to further engagements on interesting topics that will able to empower populations at large to ensure that they have the power of discrimination, to entrench the spiritual quotient, the physical quotient, and emotional quotient in balance, to integrate the power of discrimination, of ensuring the right brain, left brain integrates together, and they can make correct decisions to infect their lifestyle.